Divisive! That is the word of the day when it comes to Dawntrail, Final Fantasy XIV's latest expansion, and more importantly, the beginning of a new journey for the Warrior of Light after the conclusion of Endwalker. And at the end of Endwalker, we saw our favourite Scions divided, no longer being able to stay together because if they do, people do fear that the end of the world is nigh. So what do we have? We have, of course, been visited by the Hrothgar, the new race, Wuk Lamat, and we, along with the twins and Kryl, are going to be joining Wuk Lamat on her journey to become the Dawn Servant in this new land of Tural. Similarly, our dads of the crew, our old men, Rion, Jay and Thancred, they're going to be joining Dawn Servant Potentiee, Mr. Kona. He's going to be leading his charge to become Dawn Servant, and they're going to help them in some friendly rivalry among friends. Of course, we've got Estinian, who is just randomly out of nowhere, surprise, to go on a vacation to Tural. So he has to be there as well. But we do have our mega nerds, Y'shtola and G'raha. They're going to be hanging back and waiting to join the story later. We did see in the trailer they are going to be joining us. And as we go into this new expansion, certain expectations are rife. In top place, of course, it's Kryl, our beloved Kryl. We can't wait to find out what's going to be happening with her, her origins, everything following Galuf in Eureka. We're going to be finding out what's going on there in her homeland. And then, of course, we have the, apparently, I'm not dismissing it, thirst trap that is our bunny boy, Erenville. He's going to be in second place of things we're expecting because people love Erenville very much. Okay. And in third place, of course, is the Dawn Servant. This is going to be dealing with Wuk Lamat and Kona and their mission to solve all these issues that are happening in Tural in our brand new continent. Now, is that what we got? Kinda? A little bit? A lot of people have said that Dawntrail's advertising and marketing isn't what they bought. They were marketed and lied to. That is really, really unfair. FF14 goes out of its way because it is a story game first to ensure that there's no spoilers, that everything will be enjoyed in the story, and they give you the tiniest little snippets of things to tease you in, but there's nobody getting into this knowing that, like, oh, they're going to share with me what's going to happen. This isn't World of Warcraft, right? That's not going to happen. However, I do think it's fair to say people's expectations were obviously very high for certain characters to get a lot of screen time, and they wanted that. And in that regard, they did miss the mark. We are, of course, going to be talking about every detail of the MSQ. Spoilers ahead, but here we go. An issue with Dawntrail we have to deal with is that it attempts way too much. So much, in fact, that it's hard to structure this video. So I'm going to keep it simple. There's two parts, pre and post Dawn Servant, or more accurately, pre and post Trolley. Okay, let's get into the Wuk Lamat subject. I'm sure you're all invested in this. I want to say this. Before we get into the details of how I arrived here, I want to say that I personally believe Wuk Lamat was entirely doomed as a character before we ever clicked the install button. In a recent podcast with Grinding Gear and OK Mage and Jesse Cox, we discussed the idea of the Scions taking a back seat for a while. Maybe they would move away, like we'd seen with Y'shtola in Stormblood, and then come back later on. They kind of did that, but there was a fear, clearly. And instead what they decided to do is what I've dubbed the abuse of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. What do I mean by that? I mean they kept dangling them in front of us like a cat with string, so we'd be all excited and happy and our tails would be going, and then they would rip them away from us just as quickly so that we were left frustrated and angry. Have a look at this, because this is probably something you remember of just how many ways they came up with introducing the Scions in an epic fashion and then very quickly taking them away. Endwalker disbanded the Scions under the idea that when they get together, people get nervous because the world is probably about to explode. I can buy into that, but it doesn't make any sense in Tural. They have no idea who the Scions are, so we can dispense with that reasoning for this separation. Squeenix do have a real issue though, and they've realized it. The Scions and their friends cover nearly every aspect of friction that they could run up against. They're experts in the physical and the ethereal, so when we encounter tech issues, for example, we should be calling Sid. Massive golden gate with weird ether, Y'shtola and Yuri should be on speed dial. Giant army threatening to overthrow a continent, Estinian and Thancred should be front and center. When we don't do those things, it's just stupid. The Wuk Lamat focus is taken to the ludicrous extremes when Solution 9 is about to go to full war, and we have the Scions defending towns with a population of 50 instead of being in the frontline primary battle. Although the cutscene was very, very cool. Wild Westinian is easily one of, if not the most powerful fighter on Etheris. Better not bring him along, eh? Or preceding our difficult ascension of Solution 9, we suddenly have the Scions appear at the top to join us with no setup or foreshadowing because we need 8 people for the upcoming trial. It's really strange considering all of the other single-player FFs that have the teams rejoining do this better. They let you know that the team is moving in other directions, and in fact some of the previous dungeons have you seeing the other Scions maneuvering through a tower, for example, doing other things so they make sense that they appear at the end. It just constantly feels out of place. So how does this affect what I think of Wuk Lamat? It built constant resentment to the character. Oh cool, Y'shtola and G'raha are here with all the fanfare and music. This is going to be awesome. We have a golden city door and now the nerds are here to crack it open and we have a whole new dynamic to the story and they're gone. Now, I don't know the reason for this. Perhaps they thought they couldn't have the Scions involved, but it's not their story, so they're there, but they're not because it needs to be about Wuk Lamat. Perhaps the voice actors are getting too expensive now, or busy with other projects, like G'raha is in a popular TV show. It's noticeable with Y'shtola's voice mix. It's way lower quality than the rest. Did she see that she only had 20 lines for the entire expansion or so and just send it from her house? There are many possibilities, but as it's always had, our beloved characters are just being sent away all the time so we can go back to Wuk Lamat, and it just builds that anger from the audience. Even if people loved Wuk Lamat, they would still be angry that G'raha is gone as fast as he arrived to once again talk with Wuk Lamat. Someone dug through the voice files and found this ratio of dialogue for the characters. It's actually really shocking. You consider that the second most voiced lines in all of the dialogue of Dawntrail, it belongs to a character that doesn't appear until the post-Trolley era. So, with that said, how much do I like Wuk Lamat? Well, not much, sadly. Look, I don't hate Wuk Lamat. I really don't. I actually have a lot of time and a lot of forgiveness for that character, but she was speedrun through a crazy story arc that needed a lot more time between it and a lot more breaks to allow it to grow and breathe. I truly believe they should have done Wuk Lamat's growth period of time during the Endwalker MSQ. It's actually, if you think about it, remarkably similar to what Zero goes through. We have these two characters which are kind of blank canvases and ignorant of the world, introduced into new environment and new culture, and they go through growth to eventually become someone we can kind of rely on and utilize in battle and all kinds of things like that. But they couldn't. Probably because she's a Hrothgar. They wanted to save the reveal of the new race until closer and closer to Dawntrail. It's too much. Dawntrail has way too much to do. They've got to take this absolutely blank slate of Wuk Lamat, get her all the way to being the Dawn Servant, and then they needed to introduce a brand new villain and have her tackle those issues and go through that whole story, and it created all kinds of weird pacing issues in the story. Dawntrail's MSQ is both extremely slow and it's way too fast in places. Wuk Lamat got least at the start. She's way too ignorant of her homeland for me to enjoy. I can pretend that she was extremely sheltered as a child to protect her from would-be assassins and never really left Tural, but that still doesn't add up to how unaware she is of the people of her homeland. Tural from the get-go is shown that ever since the Dawn Servant came to be, it's culturally diverse as hell. Wuk Lamat even takes us on a historical tour of the tablets, showing the rich history of the Dawn Servant and the people that Daddy came to rule over and bring together. She tours us the city, showing the culinary delights, the marketplace full of people from all over Tural, yet she at the same time knows absolutely nothing whatsoever about them. It's as if she's seen these like weird still 2D images of people her entire life and never once interacted with them, which we know isn't true. Now, I get it. It's to allow us to learn of the cultures of Tural, this new zone that we're exploring through her eyes, but her ignorance just doesn't add up. She's never in her life known of the Hanu Hanu greeting, for example, despite being at their festival at least once before. So I guess we're to assume that the Hanu Hanu never greeted anyone in a traditional way at their annual traditional festival, or that despite their heavy presence in the marketplaces that she spent her entire childhood life in, she isn't aware of the Pelu Pelu traits of trading. I've seen lots of people try to justify this, maybe she forgot, well, she was a child and child is stupid. I have 2 kids. It just doesn't work that way. I don't buy it, and it just started to grate on me. The same can be said for her power creep, and once again, this is a divisive opinion. It's really quick. It's a really quick turnaround from someone who is just very easily dismissed physically by Bakul Jar Jar to not only beating him later, but also while crushing 50 men at the same time. Now, while in canon, she has faced dungeons and a trial with our help, which is important because we are the Warrior of Light. We are a nuclear weapon in a world where people are throwing rocks at each other. It's still an enormous leap of power level that she ends up having, which is more akin to an anime strength of finding and discovering one's inner power. I imagine the idea was to demonstrate how strong and independent she's become to rise to the role of the Dawn Servant, but it just came across rushed and unearned. More so if you did the dungeon or the trial with friends. I don't understand why we just don't have her be a really great fighter from the start. Have her interrupt Bakul Jar Jar like she does, but physically stand up to him. And then in the aftermath, show her being terrified. Show her shaking. Yes, she can stand up to him physically, but she's terrified. And she's terrified of failing because at that point, it would shatter this ideal vision of what the Dawn Servant should be in her eyes. Her story journey is more about her ability to lead different peoples than swing an axe. Mixed with the regular vomiting, childish approach to her perceived image, it's just immature, and immaturity is rife in Dawntrail. It's a major step back from the morally grey and ambiguous topics of the past. I was totally taken aback by a few things. The cliche changing minds of generations of racism from the rebellious giants because we helped one out during a random encounter, the downplaying of the eugenics by the Mamul, and that the power of friendship never at any point backfires for Wuk Lamat. It's more of a Saturday morning cartoon lesson at best. We all know reality is very, very different, and FF14 traditionally has done this extremely well. Garlemald. Garlemald is one of my favorite zones in all of Final Fantasy XIV. It's handled with such care, and it's true-to-life origins of a population that has known generational war. People born into war and died in war and had children that were raised into war. They have only known, lived and breathed the propaganda and the state-published media that everybody outside of Garlemald is a demon and a liar. And it's told so well through the simple story of 2 sisters that the twins genuinely want to help and care for because they're in trouble, they're in danger, and they end up dead. And they end up dead because they can't believe that anybody from outside would ever be nice because that is all they've ever known. That is reality of dealing with these things, and we see it in history books every single day. And it doesn't happen in Dawntrail. It's cartoonish. We have encounters with racists, eugenics, genocide. All that happens in Dawntrail, and it's dealt with in such a friendly, happy-go-lucky way with Wuk Lamat, and it's almost hand-waved and dealt with within literal minutes in some occasions, and sorted, and we all go on our merry way with big smiles on our faces. I was desperately waiting, and I truly believe this was a negative for Wuk Lamat to not have to deal with this. But when her happy-go-lucky, power of friendship attitude would meet somebody who is going to say no. No. Someone who genuinely is an evil person that we know exists in the real world, who would manipulate, who would change, who would utilize humans' lives and suffering, as we well know, for their own gain, and tell her to do one. That could be a real friction that character could come up against where this attitude just doesn't work. And it just never happened. So those are my thoughts on Wuk Lamat, the pros and the cons, and I believe the English voice actor did a tremendous job, but it was just a doomed venture from the get-go. So let's talk about the pre-trolley story itself. It's a slow start, man. Cultures is the theme of Dawntrail, obviously, but this time we aren't coming in with that pre-established set of characters, an ongoing story that we're heavily invested in. That's fine. We are building to something bigger. We all know that. However, it does mean that we just don't have as much forgiveness than we would have for, say, Endwalker, where we know we're getting to something or a conclusion. The Pelu Pelu zones and the Hanu Hanu are very drawn out. The zones are utterly incredible visually, but the gameplay is a little rough. It comes once again to pacing. Every time I think of what grabbed my attention, the time was thrown at something else. The Mamul are by far the most interesting story. I wanted to know, how did this eugenics work to form all these babies, especially when we see how many have been placed into the jars? Were the tribes forced together in the goal? Was it essentially illegal to reproduce within your own tribe? What of the people who failed to produce? Were their parents dealt with in some way? Were they using essential baby factories? I don't say this in some sort of morbid fascination, honestly, but this is literally how eugenics worked historically, but there's no time given to that in comparison to, say, saving the reeds for the Hanu, or learning the secret, not-so-secret cooking recipe. Shaloni also falls into this box. This was a zone I loved so much. It was a flavor change from the jungles of the other zones, and I liked the premise of the zone. A somewhat lawless area representing the old gold rush time of North America. They even built a wall, operating somewhat like outside of the Dawn Servant's purview as long as they didn't get too out of control, so they dispensed their own justice. It was fantastic for me. However, the really interesting part of this was the Native American representation. The cerulean mining and the advancing technology of the area has clearly been causing a lot of problems for the locals and especially the wildlife. So, this could have been a really interesting moment in having the perspectives of our brand new Dawn Servants Wuk Lamat and Kona. On the one hand, Wuk Lamat is far more empathetic to people's plights and the issues are clear. However, Kona would probably point out that the advancement of Tural is far more important. Connecting the realm via rail, the benefits of ceruleum that he's seen are clear and worth some, what he would probably perceive as minor inconveniences. So what happens with this interesting dynamic? We just tell them don't worry about it. If you have any concerns, Kona will probably deal with it, and then we take all their resources and we leave. This is just another story with an established historical, factual, deep history for them to draw on, but it's just hand-waved so we can go into an epic trolley building cutscene. Not all doom and gloom, though. One of the stories I thought they handled supremely well in the pre-trolley era of the MSQ was Wuk Lamat's biological father. A good man who didn't abandon her because he didn't want her, but for her safety, had to send her over to Galul Jar Jar. And this information he doesn't want her to know because she's risen to such a powerful, strong person of herself, and he's super proud of her. Immediately, this is used against her by Bakul Jar Jar to upset her, make her angry, put her on the back foot so he can smash and crush her, and she doesn't take it that way. The story was done super well. You're not my father. Biologically you are, but I was raised well. Galul Jar Jar looked after me. He gave me so much. He treated me well. I had a wonderful childhood, and now I'm here. Perspective Dawn Servant. And he respects that. He totally understands it. And it's so wonderful that we see later on how proud he is when she actually rises to the Dawn Servant, and how it's such a crying shame that he had to listen to that song.
Yay! Idyllic society with no flaws. What the fuck is this song? Okay.
I suppose here's a good time to talk about some of the scenes that seem to have been, not retconned, that's the wrong word, but additional stuff has been added afterwards because of probably internal reception. Now, I want to be clear on something. This happens with every single story. This is nothing new, is they test the story with some people who don't know what's going to happen, and by their reactions, they change some things around. The most obvious scene in this is, of course, the Hanu with the reeds. I know for a fact, with the amount of people who were watching me go through this, that I was not the only one who was like, what? Where they performed their little ritual and suddenly all the reeds went from dead to full grown and flourishing out of nowhere, and I was like, what the hell? They didn't know that this ritual that they have done traditionally has this kind of effect. And people were getting mad, and they said, keep playing. And what they'd done is they'd added a character in later who does appear in different parts of the story, but then comes in with like a very blatant and quick explanation of what happened because it is not set up beforehand. They point out like, oh, well, actually the ritual had become more theatric than actually some sort of like ritual that we do to keep the plants. It's just something we did. And I can buy into that. I really can. We have something similar in the UK called Bonfire Night, where they throw a literal effigy of a human man. This sounds really horrible. Onto a fire, and we all stand there and cheer, and we have treacle toffee and all that kind of stuff. Now, the real meaning of that is absolutely lost on most people as to what it is. It's actually not a good thing by any means, but it's a good excuse now for a night out where there's a fire and people toast marshmallows and things like that. So I totally buy into it. Now, that's okay. It's just that clearly there are a few moments in the story that aren't delivered properly because, let me be clear with you, internally here, certainly me and Chris, we have sat and talked about certain things for like 45 minutes to try and get our heads around what just happened. I swear to God, we've sat here doing that regularly leading into this video. None more so than what I would consider the most divisive cutscene in the game. The death of Galul Jar Jar. This started so damn well. Bakul Jar Jar's path to redemption, the horror in the streets as the citizens were being cut down, seemingly their essence being sucked right out of them, and the showdown between father and son. However, the actual death scene really hit me, and I know it hit many others very wrong. Look, man, I can buy that it was honorable and culturally appropriate for the one-on-one at the very start. But the resurrection of Tural should have absolutely had the entire Scion army jumping in immediately to help. Certainly when he popped the berserk button. Now, I know people suggest it all happened in an instant like a D&D turn, but I've rewatched this thing several times. That is just not what happens. Tural has a very slow, drawn-out dialogue and build-up after the resurrection, before then going on the offensive with clashing swords while everyone just pointlessly watches on, and they even cut to reacts from the onlookers like TikTokers on the prowl. I hated this. But it was then made worse later on in the outskirts. Wuk Lamat is about to confront Tural Jar. And here Alize makes a huge deal about how if it ever looks unfair, and I understand the cultural attack, then we're getting involved because it could be moronic not to do that. And I was screaming, yes, it would be moronic not to do that. Once again, it felt like they were trying to rectify a problem that they had found in testing. It's also a case of not having to put characters in this situation in the first place and avoid this whole mess entirely. Tural is being sieged. Have the Scions blockaded from the throne room, having to watch on in distress, or have the room full of Tural Jar's guards slowing them down, something other than just standing and watching him and let him leave. Now, I know a lot of people actually don't mind this. I really mind this. But thankfully, we're moving on. The weaponized trolley is built, so let's blow it up and meet definitely not sus AF Queen Sphene. Oh, now it gets going. The big reveal of the threat in the previews to Dawntrails is here. Sphene is so sus. It is way more sus than the first time we met Meteion, and time has moved on. Immediately, I was hit with that familiar FF14 joy of speculation. Have we time traveled? Is this even our world or a reflection? Erenville's scared to death. It's all gotten weird. The USB people are hella suspects, and Mommy's a floating robot leading a rebellion, and also she is very blatantly already dead. I was loving pretty much everything from this moment on. My sci-fi nerd brain was in overdrive, and so many questions and possibilities raised. Most of which got discussed, especially the overriding thought. Solution 9 can never, ever work. I was ecstatic that Graha pointed this out to Sphene, and she had to ignore it. Her programming just doesn't account for failure. Just to preserve the system, save the people. That's her job. Sphene is honestly the most tragic character in the story. How manipulated has she been by those who brought her back to enact their vision of paradise? What traits, memories, and so on were taken to set her on this path? Especially because it's revealed she can alter her program. Has she done it before? For what reason? Is she even remotely close to the original queen at all at this point? The whole concept of Solution 9 is terrifying. Namika is such a wonderful character for this poisoned paradise to play out. A loving, caring surrogate mother who spent her entire life caring for others, just to be forgotten on a whim. And she had a lovely resolution in living memory. This simple, honest storyline opens so many doors that aren't just thrust in your face. Are those people who are children in the living memory? Are they actually children? Or are they that way because that's the only time they were happy in their entire lives? Have parents not only lost children tragically, but now no longer remember them? Could they literally be walking past their children in the streets and not know it? They wouldn't remember them even in this utopic afterlife. A thread that is explored with the loving man, who's waited decades for his love to enter the afterlife, only for her not to remember who he ever was. I'm barely scratching the surface of what all this manipulation of people's minds can ultimately lead to. It's certainly not utopia, and it's certainly not new. There's great examples of this idea that are explored in movies such as Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and once again Doctor Who's episode Gridlock, a society that uses a drug to forget bad aspects of their lives. I certainly cannot wait to deal with the fallout of shutting down the whole system this society has relied on for such a long time. It's the post-MSQ that I crave, for the same reasons of dealing with the fallout of Ishgard, losing their religious foundation, and then what happens next. Otis/Steiner was just wonderful. His everlasting commitment to his calling as the broken knight who in his mind failed his mission and now finds himself caring for the future king once again. His reappearance in living memory was even more special as we gave him the solace he never knew in life. As you can tell overall, I very much enjoyed the final 3 zones of the game. It isn't perfect, and I mentioned some of those moments earlier with random Scion appearances, and it set up the future. We have a key in our hands, Azem's involvement and an ever-decreasing reason as to why we can't move between reflections. The future is going to be very bright.
Could this be? Villainy! You seek to bewilder me for purposes most foul!
But so far we have discussed Wuk Lamat's story. Remember, that was number 3 on the list of things that we were excited for about Dawntrail. But what of the Bunny Man? And what, of course, of our good lady Kryl? I can't say I was enamored as others with Erenville coming into Dawntrail. I like him fine, but not much more than that. His awkward, almost Vulcan nature being prodded by his childhood friend was very fun. The relationship him and his mother had was a little odd, as he is mainly sidelined into exposition man throughout most of the MSQ, but it doesn't pick up until the outskirts and Robo-Mommy appears. Firstly, what an amazing job they did with her. She was such a bright spot of relief for a fussy little bun-bun, giving the mad thoughts swimming around my head at the time, and rightly there were those who don't exactly like what the hell is going on with the USB heads. It's sad following that they then sideline the story again until the finale of Living Memory. We get a brooding Erenville. I can't say I enjoyed how the finale played out. It fit the characters, awkwardly dancing around the issue of his mother's impending final demise, but I never felt the tour of the plants was the resolution I was looking for. Certainly how odd it was that we tagged along like the biggest third wheel of all time. Seriously, that was really weird. Although it wasn't a story I was super interested in, I kind of feel bad for the Erenville enjoyers who perhaps didn't get their fill. However, I do care about Kryl, and our girl got screwed. Our girl got totally screwed. When this was announced and it was going to be seemingly Kryl-centric, she got the new job. She was coming along with us to this thing. We obviously, I think many of us suspected Kryl was going to be a pretty central figure in the main story, and our girl gets hand-waved off every single time. Oh, your cool thing's like a USB storage drive. It's probably got valuable information on it. We'll talk about it later. Oh, the Golden City's open, and your technology allows us to open it. We'll deal with it in a bit. Galul Jar Jar has information about Guluf. In fact, everybody knows Guluf, apparently, but they're all going to tell you about it later on. You're like, dude, will you give Wuk Lamat? Just go over there for 10 minutes. Okay, let us deal with some Kryl stuff. And it just doesn't happen. Our 15 minutes of fame with Kryl does come in living memory. If you were to tell me, like, picturing your scene, right? Picture in your mind that we're going to have Kryl reunite with her parents who left her all those 20-odd years ago and left her with some strange tech, and now we discover she came through this bizarre portal to another world, another reflection. What would that encounter involve? And you would say, I'm 99% sure, Mike, that would have an ice cream fetch quest and then a player quiz is what goes with that scene. I would have been like, what? But it is how it plays out. Now, here's the thing. I can't be that mad. It fits their characters. It does. The 2 parents are obviously as scientifically minded as Kryl is. Kryl has an endless thirst of knowledge. There's a social awkwardness there that G'raha breaks up. It's a little gratuitous, sure, but I get it. It opens the conversation. They start some dialogue. But then just as soon as we got through this, because they blue balls the hell out of it, It's like, please talk, please say something. And then they finally talk and she immediately leaves because she's found a cool library to go and investigate where we can do tests. Awesome. We do get the answers we're looking for. That is ultimately the truth. But I know I'm not the only one here. We just wanted more. We wanted more Kryl. A little less Wuk Lamat, a little bit more Kryl in that cake recipe would have gone a long way. Because yes, we did get what we kind of wanted out of it, but I think we just felt disappointed.
As the story came to a close, the latter half gave me hope. I don't hate Dawntrail, and I believe what Yoshi P said at the US media tour, that this MSQ was to show what fans were and weren't receptive to, and that would guide them going forwards. But it's clearly flawed, and it's deserving of its mixed response. I would really summarize my issues like this. Firstly, pacing. The potentially interesting stuff was sidelined for seemingly the most mundane of tasks. I said earlier it's both slow and rushed. It's a consequence of just having way too much to accomplish. Heaven's Ward, Shadowbringers, and Endwalker had a primary singular focus for us to think about. The Dragonsong War, the Rejoining, the Despair, everything else added layers to that focus and built characters along the way while still following that one central path. Dawntrail tries to build a whole continent, several characters, a new villain after the halfway mark, their entire backstory, and conclude it. It feels like throwing too many ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. Secondly, the abusing of the Scions. Either have them or don't. Wuk Lamat was going to be resented regardless of how much people liked her. The phrase, "I can't miss you if you don't go away," comes to mind. Our eyes light up when Sid, Nero, Emmerich, or Gosetsu show up because we know we're going to change the dynamic of the story for a while. Having fan favourites show up then just run away so we can get back to what we've already been doing for the last 20 hours is frustrating at best. Thirdly, the predictions of what fans would like and dislike by Squeenix here was off the mark. No, I don't love Wuk Lamat. I don't hate her, but she's overwhelming everything else to an absurd degree. I truly believe, internally, they thought everyone was going to love her completely and not mind spending the entirety of the story alongside her. I would have preferred like the Emmerich or Hien approach. They're around a lot during their main story, but then they have other things to focus on, sometimes to give some space. Someone can say for Bakul Jar Jar, right? He unironically has the best story arc of all the characters. While Wuk learns the power of friendship, Kona learns that maybe Charlian doesn't have all the answers for Tural, it's Bakul Jar Jar who has a solid groundwork, his abusive childhood, the importance of becoming the Dawn Servant to spare his people the horror that they have created, accepting he can fail, but then still succeed via cooperation to eventually fighting alongside everyone. What a great story. Maturity. I have to believe it's intentional, but Dawntrail feels far more targeted at a younger audience than what we've had for the last few years. Whether they feared it was getting all too heavy all the time and needed to tone back, or they're actually targeting a younger audience is hard to say. Typically, MMO gamers skew older, so it's an odd move and it was bound to cause friction. FF14 is known for tackling difficult subjects extremely well with care and subtlety, even in single expansion arcs. This time it was more Sesame Street, beating you on the head with flowers and easy wins. I think back to the great sadness I felt with Elidibus' demise, the rabid dog who lost himself, the harrowing layers of similarities that led to Emmerich and Hraesvelger finding common ground, Estinian's path from Dragon Killer to Dragon Rider, Tesline's eyes as she was taken after her kind soul was all that was holding a camp together. All done in a way that was logical, made sense, not forced. I really missed that here, and I think many others did too.
Dawntrail genuinely doesn't do that much different than every other expansion. The difference is this time it's a fresh story, a fresh journey, and we're not already invested into what the next step of a previous story is. This is all brand new, and therefore we have just less forgiveness for its flaws. There are flaws in every single part of the previous MSQs, and there are missteps here. I'm sure in Japan right now, they are looking at all the feedback and deciding what are we going to do. I truly believe when Yoshi P told the US media tour people that this is throwing stuff at the wall. See what sticks, what do fans like, what do they don't like, and that will shape the direction of where we're going forward, similar to what happened in A Realm Reborn. Now, they obviously have a master design of what the story is going to be for content creation's sake, but now they will decide which way to go. Will they bench Wuk Lamat entirely and just move her out of the way, or will they double down and try and rescue her? It did work for Lys in Stormblood, at least for me in the post-MSQ, so they could go that way. There's a lot for them to solve now. Why was the reception so mixed? Why did they miss the mark with so many different things? Is it a collision of the East-West finally coming to head in a new story? Is it simply player expectations are completely different? Do they want that younger audience instead and they need to move in a different direction? Who knows where it's going to go? But one thing I do know, we have a magic key, we know a Zem's involved, and we know that they are dramatically running out of ways to not have us explore all the other reflections, and we're going to be going on an adventure, and I'll certainly be there for it. My final conclusion, Dawntrail, divisive. I'll see you again.